go! Let's go! Yeah. Quake 2 is the game of my childhood. I used to spend countless hours fighting against the Strogg army. This title ignited my profound affection for video games, acting as the catalyst that sparked the flames of a lifelong passion. A passion that I hope to share with you. As a child, I wasn't very critical nor analytical while playing games. The coolness factor, constant action and having enemies to shoot at were the most important features that I cared about. So it's incredibly interesting to dive back into the world of Quake 2 right now, thanks to Remastered, released last year. So satisfying! This is Delayed Review, a format in which I thoroughly analyze games. I will be going through the base game and all of the expansions. Then I'll dive into Steam reviews, after which we are going to check the achievements offered by the game. I'm sort of a completionist. Not so long ago I made a video about the remastered version of the first Quake. Let me tell you, that game aged beautifully, offering an old school approach to FPS design with its puzzle-like level layout, little traps and exhilarating encounters. The question is whether Quake 2 also stood the test of time. This is Delayed Review Quake 2. This review is based on 28 hours of gameplay. During that time I managed to beat Quake 2 and all of its expansions on Nightmare difficulty. To get the full picture I had experienced various multiplayer modes. I also got 100% achievement completion for the game. This is review of the PC version played on mouse and keyboard. And one last note before we start. As aforementioned, I have played a lot of Quake 2 in my childhood. Definitely more than its predecessor. The first Quake was just too dark and too scary for me. My point is that nostalgia might subtly influence my perspective on the subject at hand. I'll do my best to remain fair. Also, I encourage you to check out my video on the first Quake, links are in the description. To be extra clear, I'm reviewing the 2023 remastered version of Quake 2. Night Dive Studios, responsible for an impressive remaster of the first Quake, has once again been entrusted by id Software and Bethesda to refresh an old legend. So they did. This is a complete package, with all major expansions and one new map pack released purely for this remaster. Machine Games, creators of the newest Wolfenstein games, designed the madly impressive Fall of the Machine. More on that later. Right now let's talk about Quake's history. Original Quake 2 was released back in 1997. id Software, the developers behind the game, were on the top of the gaming world during that period of time. After consecutively releasing legendary groundbreaking FPS titles one after another, the studio left a lasting footprint on video game industry. I have explored id Software's history in my late review about the first Quake, links are in the description. For the sake of this video, I want to establish few major qualities of Quake 2's predecessor. It was one of the first games to use the true 3D graphics. The game engine was a marvel of its time, allowing its developers to create condensed, puzzle-like levels, adding verticality to the map design. The atmosphere of the first game was grimdark, leaning into medieval-esque dark fantasy territories. So was the soundtrack, created by Trent Reznor, relying heavily on the unsettling, calm, ambient music. Quake 2 presents a great thematic departure from the first game. It was supposed to be a new IP, spearheading id Software's new game engine. Unfortunately, the studio had problems with deciding and securing a title for the game. The amalgamation of colliding ideas, indecision combined with tries to meet the deadlines resulted in hammering an additional nail into the Quake logo. Going for the brand recognition definitely seemed like a better option business-wise. This great remaster contains the so-called id Vault, a virtual museum for aficionados of Quake 2's history. This treasure trove allows to learn more about the game, its software, or even their design processes. It's a treat for enthusiasts like me. id Vault provides a lot of information, decorated with preserved concept arts. Needless to say, this is a very solid remaster. The game works perfectly fine on modern hardware. During my time spent on Stroggos, I experienced no crashes, pretty much no bugs. I was surprised by the multitude of options and settings. Players can switch between original and the modernized graphics. There are even advanced options regarding color saturation. Remastered Quake 2 puts a strong emphasis on the accessibility options, always a commendable choice. Developers spent a lot of time incorporating various options for turning text to voice in the game, which of course has a strong application during multiplayer. Only that I play my games in English, but my system is set to Polish, so I could only choose from Polish-speaking bots.
Z 1G1, z 1G1 Rules, Dangerous Coffee, Gege.
Gege! I left it on, it was too funny.
Z 1G1 Ulo.
Quake 2's remaster represents a correct way of enhancing the original experience. Developers took the liberty to upgrade some of the gameplay elements. Various enemies got some new attacks and animations. Few weapons behave a little bit different. A new mechanic is introduced where most firearms deal double damage to an idle, unsuspecting targets. It shows that the developers care about their craft, striving for the best Quake 2 experience. This is passion. Originally, Quake 2 ran on the new iteration of Quake engine, creatively named as Quake 2 Engine. John Carmack was id Software's main tech guy, the literal mastermind pushing the boundaries of game engine fidelity. New tech allowed for more detailed environments and character models.
Damn, she definitely got enhanced.
Quake 2 engine welcomed color, detailed skyboxes, a feat eagerly used by id Software's developers.
That's a big gun. And I like the effect from those chimneys.
Quake 2 is not afraid to use brighter, more open zones, which then get juxtaposed with narrow caves, long corridors, or futuristic bases. The game offers more variety in its color scheme, opening up with sunny, bright zones where orange and yellow are the dominating colors. Then it offers more grayish, darker, confined industrial zones. The range is definitely wider and more diverse than what we got in the first game. Quake 2 goes for the theme of cybernetting, highly industrial and mechanical hellscape. Planet Strogos and its inhabitants represent a grotesquely brutal take on body enhancements. The Strogg, an alien violent race of cybernetic constructs, becomes the new opposing force for players to deal with. The gruesome synthesis of flesh and mechanical parts creates an impressive army of cyborgs with varied interesting designs. Unfortunately, it also means that the grimdark, ominous atmosphere of the first Quake is irrevocably lost. Gore is still an inherent part of the game. Enemies who suffer way too much damage blow up into pieces, leaving behind a huge blood spatter. While the change in overall tone of the game seems to cater to general audiences more than unnerving eldritch darkness of the first Quake, it's still a game for mature players. There's a lot of gore. Which is so weird because I played the game as a 10-year-old and I turned out fine, right? Right? Remaster adds multiple quality of life improvements into the game. It also refreshes the graphics, adding shadows counted in real time. Quake 2 can still look fine. Each expansion dares to venture into more varied landscapes, but is the newest Fall of the Machine that revolutionizes Quake 2 environments with its crazy landscapes. More on that later. Looking back at Quake 2 allows to experience part of the gaming history firsthand, with all of its virtues, flaws, and even dead ends. I mean, Quake 2's engine famously went into the direction of 3D modeled explosions. Each of those explosions is an actual model, not a particle effect. It's awesome. Sound work aged really well. It might be my nostalgia, but I think it would be at least 20 years since I last played this game. And before starting the remaster, I still remember the sound of the shotgun. I mean this satisfying meaty sound. This is so meaty. I love this shotgun. This is one of the best shotguns. The same goes for the soundtrack. Playing the game nowadays, I was surprised how good some of the weapons sound. Super Shotgun has this powerful, thundering sound which magnifies the sense of its power.
It sounds powerful.
Railgun with its pew shooting sounds, spinning chain gun or hyper blaster. Each weapon sounds distinct and satisfying. Even changing weapons was made more dynamic in Quake 2 thanks to adding more sound work. You can clearly see improvements from the first game. Enemies have their characteristic sounds or calls which help you recognize who are you fighting or who is hiding near your position. Voice acting is pretty sparse. By today's standards, it could be described as mediocre. The volume mixing seems to be a little bit off, especially during cinematics. Then there are those marine prisoner voices which I'm pretty sure sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger on purpose. I guess it's some kind of a joke. I mean, at some point I was actually scouring the internet to find out if it wasn't Arnold who voiced the prisoners. The soundtrack written by Sonic Mayhem presents a great juxtaposition to the music of the first game. It fits how much Quake 2 changed from its predecessor. First title put more emphasis on ghastly, eerie and unsettling ambient music, very rarely exploding into faster action-based tracks. Quake 2 favors grindy heavy metal music with lots of repetitions. It fits the game perfectly. This is a fast-paced shooter set in cybernetic mechanical world. Repeated guitar riffs sell the industrial tone, gears grinding, cogs turning in a continuous heavy manner. Music enhances combat sections, driving player forward, increasing the strive for blood and more carnage. The soundtrack lifts the depressing, unsettling mood of the first game and exchanges it for never-ending heavy combat music. And that's what Quake 2 is. It's all in your face, dynamic, blunt. Sonic Mayhem's soundtrack emerges from the background, taking central stage, even dominating certain moments, encouraging player to fight.
Music.
The new art direction mixed with dynamic soundtrack are the main reasons for the change of the game's atmosphere and mood. A Quake of old was lost, that's for sure, but in its wake a new beast emerged. I must admit that it was the soundtrack that I remembered the most vividly from my childhood. That's how impactful it is. Quake 2's single-player mode opens up with a cinematic. Yes, there is a pre-rendered cinematic and there is an actual plot. The story is very simplistic. Human race was invaded by cybernetically enhanced aliens who gather body parts in order to assemble an even greater army. After the invasion, humans retaliate by sending marines directly into the home planet of the Strogg. We play as Bitterman, one of the marines who crash lands on the planet. The narrative from this point onwards consists of commands given to the player, creating a chain of tasks aimed at taking down the Strogg forces. From the gameplay perspective, the plot is used to loosely push players forward. Story is an excuse to kill and destroy any opposing forces. I would even argue that players are able to learn more about the lore surrounding the Strogg race and their home planet of Stroggos from id Vault than from the game itself. The uncomplicated plain narrative marks the change in the direction of the series and FPS genre in general. id Software's developers resigned from the loosely tied mishmash of various puzzle-like maps. The narrative started to successfully seep through the gameplay, influencing even the maps. Quake 2 uses zones and areas which represents various Strogg facilities. Power plant, jail, factory, mines. There is a theme for each zone and this theme is preserved through consecutive levels, making Bitterman's struggles in the world of Stroggos somewhat believable, with the word believable being placed in quotations. Quake 2 represents modernized approach to level design. The funny thing is that only 1 year later, Half-Life would shatter any existing foundations, setting a new standard for the plot in FPSs. I guess it's part of the reason why Quake 2 fell into obscurity. it resigned from episodic structure, where each level was a self-contained deadly puzzle box spiked with traps designed specifically to challenge players. Quake 2 design was outshined rapidly after its release, which made it forgettable. But does it deserve to be forgotten? Instead of episodes, Quake 2 uses units, which are a collection of smaller levels, all taking place in the same larger zone or facility. Maps within a single unit are interconnected with each other. From time to time, players will be tasked to backtrack to previous level or take a detour into different place in order to grab a power source, come back and open completely new route. I remember playing Quake 2 as a kid, being stuck when I first encountered the need to backtrack. I barely understood English, so I had no idea what to do. Modern Quake 2 does a better job explaining your goals, but let's face it, many casual gamers play shooters as a means of relaxation, to just turn off their minds and go with the flow. It's not so hard to imagine that some of them might get lost in a net of interconnected maps. That's why the Remaster adds the compass. It works in the simplest way imaginable, showing a direct path painted on the ground leading to the objective. It's brainless. In most of the games, I would be vividly opposing the idea of the compass. I believe it undermines exploration and level design. However, Quake's gameplay shines in its fast-paced, brutal encounters. Small-time, fast exploration, such as discovering hidden rooms or secrets, is enough and doesn't kill the flow. Longer walks, especially backtracking sections, do not offer any value. Compass allows players to find their way if they'll get lost. That's why I'm going to let it slide. Maps in Quake 2 represent a modernized take on level design. Interiors as well as exterior sections are created not only to clash players against various cybernetic foes, but also to deepen immersion. Zones are built to resemble something that could work in a given scenario. An actual area of the Strogg facility, with machinery intended for a specific job, whether those are jail cells, water pumps or numerous consoles in a command room. It all makes sense and adds to the complexity of architecture. Having said that, map designers still cling onto surprising players with traps. Some of them are easier to spot.
Come on. This will open up. Question is when. New weapon. We know when this will open up.
Some of them are just pure bullshit. DNA of the first Quake is still recognizable through trap placement.
Such an ominous looking room.
There's this maniacal twist in designing some of the deadly surprises in a way where unprepared player gets totally stunned. Let's be real, by modern standards, some of the most unexpected lethal traps are not a sign of a good map design. They are created to be sort of those gotcha moments, intended to kill players upon the first encounter, so then after dying, players can readjust their strategy and prematurely prepare for what's going to happen.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
And that was a trap. Few of those environmental hazards clearly go against the philosophy of designing levels to be those functional alien facilities. In what scenario having crashing sliding blocks would be acceptable in a corridor leading into a facility?
A trap like in the first Quake.
Traps, however, are not as significant in Quake's 2 map design philosophy as they were in the first game. They are also in general more manageable. Another artifact of the legacy Quake map design persists in the form of secrets.
And first secret, grenade.
Strogg bases stash additional ammunition, armor, pickups, or even weapons in hidden corridors, various nigh inaccessible platforms, or in small rooms covered by the fissured walls.
Secret.
Secrets are used to provoke exploration. Additional health packs, pickups or ammunition are a sufficient reward, especially on higher difficulties. However, I consider early weapon drops to be the most rewarding part of secret hunting. You see, the first Quake used the same model of gratifying players for exploration. The game used the episodic structure to differentiate map packs. In each episode, player had to unlock all of the weapons again, which represented power progression. or we can call it weapon progression. So unlocking a secret in earlier level which granted a higher tier weapon placed player ahead of the curve, giving them an extra tool to deal with enemies, which again is immensely helpful on higher difficulties. Secret. That will be helpful. This is why with each episode there is a progression in each episode. So cool. All ready to have grenade launcher? Quake 2 uses secrets in the same way, only this time there is one singular weapon progression throughout the whole campaign. It makes early weapon acquisitions even more meaningful. Secret level. Locate a powerful weapon.
Computers updated.
Whoa! Super shotgun. Okay, that is a powerful weapon. I've spent sufficient amount of time talking about various power-ups in my review of Remastered Quake. The second installment in the series uses various powerful items in the same way. Armor shards and health packs help replenish players' HP and fortify durability, effectively reinforcing fighting tempo. Items granting timed advantages to the player can be collected and used as needed, when player needs them the most. It's a sign of modernized gameplay design principles. Power-ups activated at your own will enhance player agency, conscious planning and decision making. Rebreather allows to stay underwater for longer. It's a really good item to use for players who maybe want to investigate deeper bodies of water, which in turn can reward sturdy explorers with secret item stashes. Defensive power-ups can grant the player complete timed invulnerability. A great oh shit button to press if the situation gets too steamy. Energy armor is a great protective item, trading cells for additional protection. When turned on, it absorbs parts of the incoming damage, burning players' amassed cells. Cells are the ammunition for the heavy hitter guns like Hyper Blaster or BFG, so effectively, energy armor is a defensive item greatly increasing players' survivability at the cost of decreasing their offensive potential. Most of your cells are going to be eaten up by your armor instead of your guns. This power-up gives player choice, which is commendable. Quad damage is the most characteristic Quake power-up. It increases damage done by the player 4 times. It unleashes your inner maniac. Silencer decreases weapons fire noise, which isn't particularly helpful in Quake's environments. Then there is Adrenaline, which is basically a medkit carried by the player which can be used at will. Medkit not laying on the ground but used at will by the player? In 1998? That might have been the most futuristic part of Quake's 2 design. It's really fun to analyze older games with power of hindsight. A question: have you noticed the flaw in the ability to use such powerful power-ups at your own will? A well-timed quad damage or invulnerability can completely devalue any challenge during harder fights or boss battles.
Show me what you've got. Invulnerability, why not? And right now we'll do it like this, I guess.
I encourage giving players options and control over the gameplay. Thoughtful usage of the items to get through harder fights is fine. The game contains a multitude of demanding encounters, so getting a sudden and pretty short power spike is not a problem in grand scope of things. The only issue for me is saving stronger power-ups to later cheese boss fights. While you could argue that it's just an option given to players, I really dislike a scenario where a boss fight is made obsolete. But that's me. I see it as a flaw, while you might perceive it as an advantage. I guess it might be a reason why in Doom 2016, id Software decided to use power-ups activated on pickup. This way developers can control the flow of the combat, giving players tools to shape the encounter and commit to certain decisions. At the same time, fights which are supposed to be harder are not made obsolete. The first Quake used the exact same philosophy regarding power-up placement. So the new system increases players' agency, but opens the game to exploits. There is one more collectible item worth pointing out. Ammunition backpacks permanently increasing players' max ammo capacity for each weapon as well as replenishing every type of ammo at the same time. This is another item which rewards exploration as many backpacks are hidden. The reward is enticing enough to make backpacks worth seeking. They also represent another type of progression. Being able to stack more ammunition is highly beneficial in the world of Quake 2. An FPS game lives or dies by its shooting mechanics and weapon lineup. For such an old game, Quake 2 has some impressively satisfying weapons. Let's start with the Blaster, the first weapon each player will carry. Blaster uses rechargeable ammo. It's a substitute for a starting melee weapon. The ranged component adds a little bit of an edge, allowing for keeping your distance if you have to use this pistol. Still, it's a skippable weapon, used probably for a couple of minutes before players get stronger firearm. After that you can pretty much forget about Blaster's existence. Shotgun and Super Shotgun make their return in Quake 2, yet again they compete for the same ammo type. I'm a fan of weapon lineups supporting niche usage for each firearm. The first Quake had a pretty narrow roster of guns. In that roster, the base shotgun filled the niche of a long-range eliminator designed to take down either weakened enemies or low priority squishy targets. Super Shotgun outshined basic shotgun in close combat, but its wider pellet spread made it unreliable on greater distances. In that scenarios, it started to waste ammunition. So there was an environment for both guns to coexist. Quake 2 did not learn from that lesson. Basic shotgun is useful only as long as player does not have the Super Shotgun, which is unfortunate because I love its meaty sound. I find it weirdly satisfying to use. Super Shotgun outshines its regular counterpart. This gun is awesome. The sound of Super Shotgun represents wild power. It eats up 2 shells per shot, but the game is very generous with this type of ammo, so usually it's not an issue. Super Shotgun becomes player's ultimate close-range weapon. Machine gun and chain gun are another pair of firearms competing for the same ammunition type. Here the situation gets reversed when we compare it to the first Quake. Nail gun and Super Nail gun were Quake's quick-fire weapons. The only difference were the faster rate of fire of Super Nail gun, which made the basic version redundant. In Quake 2, both weapons have their own niche. Machine gun, usually unlocked earlier, is a rapid-firing hit-scan firearm. It's pretty good at eliminating any targets that are not too tanky in mid-range. I also found it to be preferable when fighting against flying enemies if their numbers were not too overwhelming.
Each new gun is so satisfying to use.
Chain gun offers incredible rate of fire for the cost of burning through ammo at alarming pace. Machine gun is a little bit slower but offers control. Chain gun is best used when you want to quickly mow down larger groups of enemies. You know, to just cool the herd a little bit. It's also a great weapon to use against high priority single targets if you just want to eliminate them real fast. Also, machine gun received a change in the remaster. Previously, this gun had a strong upward recoil. With the update, it no longer does that. Machine gun is still not good for precise shooting, but you don't have to constantly fight against recoil. Grenades by itself do not fit the fast pace of the game. Throwing them is clunky and takes way too long. However, the situation changes 180 degrees when player picks up grenade launcher.
Okay.
I must admit, I wasn't the fan of this weapon at first, but it quickly grew on me. Grenade launcher allows you to bounce your projectiles off walls or other obstacles to hit enemies which you don't even see. It deals a lot of damage and offers a sizable explosion range. It's also a great choice when fighting against brains, robotic enemies who use cybernetic shields in front of them.
Rocketo Launchero.
I have mixed feelings about the rocket launcher.
I mean, yours is really weak.
For a gun with such an influential history in id Software games, it feels underwhelming. In both Doom games and the first Quake, rocket launcher was the default go-to power weapon, dealing high damage through direct contact and splash damage. I feel like splash radius was reduced in Quake 2. In remastered environments where a lot of enemies learn to skillfully dodge or duck, it's much harder to hit them with slow-moving rockets. That's why rocket launcher felt unsatisfying at first. However, as player gets more skilled at using the weapon, it proves to be useful at various situations, especially against slower, larger opponents. Still, I would consider it a downgrade from other its games. Hyper Blaster is pretty much the energy variant of chain gun. It has to gain momentum before shooting. The main difference is the change from hit scan to projectiles being shot. Hyper Blaster shots have to travel and physically connect to the enemy. So successful aiming is a little bit harder, but with the amount of projectiles being shot, it quickly secures kills. This weapon also deals higher damage per each projectile. Combine it with the fact that Hyper Blaster uses cells as an ammunition, and players going for the highest damage output can use both chain gun and Hyper Blaster in the same fight.
Damn! Two with the one shot, come on!
Railgun is my favorite weapon in this series. Quake 2 ignited the spark of unconditional love for this weapon in my mind back when I was young. The love which was carried to Quake 3 Arena, where I was pawning noobs with the mid-air dynamic snipe shots. Whoever came up with the idea for this gun and then implemented it into the game is an MVP. Railgun shoots powerful rays, piercing through all enemies on its path. It's the closest Quake 2 has to sniper rifle. High damage, long range and a little bit slow rate of fire, but man, Railgun is just pure satisfaction. BFG-10K is the ultimate Quake 2 weapon. It has been of course taken straight from the Doom franchise. This is the high damage room clearer. Unfortunately, the base Quake 2 has a problem with correctly utilizing BFG's strength. It's a weapon shining in obliterating large groups of enemies. One main ball of energy slowly travels through the field, damaging any nearby foe. Quake 2 campaign rarely throws massive amounts of enemies at the player. Tankier enemies alone might feel like waste of 50 cells. However, it's noteworthy that later expansions, especially Fall of the Machine, utilize BFG-10K's potential much better. Expanded weapon roster provides choice in satisfying ways of dealing with opponents. Neat gameplay design of firearms also creates scenarios where certain weapons have an edge in specific situations. Higher difficulty settings populate levels with additional enemies, which may cause ammo shortages. Skillful weapon management is key. That's a good design, forcing players to switch between guns. It adds another layer of decision making into gunfights. You know what? Yeah. Quake 2 forgoes the eldritch, dark fantasy monstrosities, introducing a completely new roster of cybernetically enhanced foes. Light guards are the most basic opponents faced within the Strogg facilities. They are an entry-level enemies holding a blaster. The threat levels are minuscule, but later in the game new variants are introduced holding stronger weapons. Machine gun and shotgun guards deal more damage on longer and shorter distances respectively. Guards quickly familiarize players with their ability to duck or dodge projectiles. That's new. That's an important thing within 2023 Remaster. The basic enemy AI was enhanced with various tricks. Thanks to it, encounters become more dynamic. Guards and gunners dodge and dash away from projectiles. Players who like to use the peekaboo tactics, which is shooting and hiding behind corner, can be surprised. Some enemies can continue shooting at players' last known location in order to catch them leaning out. Remastered Quake 2 experience further develops enemy AI, adding even more new tricks in the later expansions. Ground Zero and Fall of the Machine introduce new ways of surprising the player, so the old enemies may learn new tricks. Enforcers are a more bulky entry-level enemy using machine gun. They are also a good example of early foe upgraded in later expansions. You see, enforcers need to prepare their weapon before shooting, making it noticeable and giving players time to react. In the later map packs, enforcers attack faster as they don't need to reload before shooting. The reload animation plays out after their first barrage, which also makes sense. I'm going to use this enemy to highlight another feature added in Quake 2. Its developers put a lot of effort into designing various death animations for different enemies. I remember being in awe as a kid, seeing how after a while flies gathered on top of enforcer corpses. But that wasn't enough. id Masterminds decided to incorporate the death animations into the gameplay. Guards and enforcers use few different death animations. One of them represents the last attack of the enemy being at death's door, a guard barely raising their gun for the last shot, or headless enforcer shooting blindly in front of him. It adds depth and the character to the gameplay. Bah! There are even two similar death animations for guards where they raise the firearm. One of them is the last hurrah shot, while the other animation represents a failed try where the guard collapses before being able to shoot. Such a detailed approach to enemy design. It's a shame that only few enemies received this kind of treatment. As soon as the second unit starts, players begin to encounter advanced cybernetically enhanced monstrosities. Berserkers and Gunners take the center stage as the most commonly faced enemies. Berserkers relentlessly charge at the player.
That's a new ability.
In the original Quake 2, it was very easy to endlessly kite them, so in Remastered version they got a new ability. Now they can leap into player's location, dealing shockwave damage. Gunners use two guns alternately, chain gun and grenade launcher. I have a wild guess that Gunners were supposed to take place of the Ogres from the original Quake. Quite sturdy enemies spamming the battlefield with grenades. Only that Gunners launch grenade barrages. 3 or 4 grenades spammed at player's location. Grenade spam effectively limits players' room for maneuver. Then, add on top of that hit scan volleys from the chain gun. It makes Gunners a formidable enemy. At the same time, it wrecks the fragile balance between tedium and fun of combat scenarios. First-person shooters have to treat their encounters with utmost care. You want to engage your players by providing varied experiences set in diverse, interactive areas. Players should have choices in how they want to approach their targets. In this complicated setup, enemy design plays a crucial role. Opponents should have an easily recognizable role in the encounter. A pattern of attacks which players can acknowledge, learn, and then develop strategies effective against the enemy. Quake 2 for the most part uses a solid, well-designed set of foes. Berserkers chase the players, becoming deadly if they manage to catch their target. Gladiators are a pretty sturdy soldiers, holding a powerful railgun. They act as snipers. Parasite, fast dog-like beasts, use their long tongues to drain players' health. Breaking line of sight or skillful dodging is key.
Strafing and refine. Slow down. Almost.
Flyers and Icaruses add further complexity into combat scenarios by introducing flying threats. Then Quake 2 adds even more opponents into the mix. This is a proven, solid approach to designing encounters. It stood the test of time as both the first Doom as well as 2016's Doom also used this design philosophy. Every fight becomes a fast-paced chess match with different types of figures, continuously moving on the field. Even the first Quake used the same principle. Fiends leaping at players, ogres launching grenades from afar, Scrags flanking players' position. So why do I have a problem with Gunners being the most common enemy in Quake 2? Terrain and tempo. By themselves, Gunners are solid opponents. The problem arises when you place them in tight spaces. The grenade barrage successfully blocks players' way of advancing. There is a reason why Doom used wide combat areas, as it allowed players to make choices. If one path is blocked by monsters, then there are at least 2 different ways of approaching foes. Unfortunately, this is a lesson that would become standard in FPS design a little bit later in time. Facing Gunner in a corridor or on stairs forces players to stop. Charging at the cyborg might result in taking a grenade barrage to the face, which on harder difficulties means death. Quake 2's combat shines with its fast pace. Player is supposed to be constantly moving during combat. Having to wait for the path to be safe kills the momentum. Each time the tempo of combat slows down, the tedium creeps in.
You wanna play that game? I can play that game. Or I can?
Bitterman's deadly march through the Strogg territory is marked with various smaller and larger scale encounters. While the heavily industrial, unnatural and mechanical theme prevails through the journey, you could notice changes in the environment. Cynical players could describe it as presenting different shades of the Strogg compounds, changing the shades from the orange military bases to green toxic sewer-like facilities. Player visits blue power center and dives deep within the red meat grinder of human parts, the Strogg factory. Developers keep adding new enemies to spice up the combat. It's unfortunate that two enemies which greatly increase the stakes during encounters show up very rarely. Medics can revive fallen comrades. Level designers like to spawn few of them when player is backtracking through previously cleared rooms. So imagine a scenario when after leaving a room full of bodies of fallen Strogg monsters, you have to come back only to discover that a medic raised all of them. There's a mechanic which can hinder medics' efforts. If player deals enough extra damage to a target or their corpse, then it's gonna blow up into pieces. Dismembered enemies cannot be revived, so it's an option.
I'm really just paranoid about these medics. I don't want any medic to res you guys.
Medics add this new dynamic to the combat where players have to wonder if living corpses won't bite them later in the ass. Medics present in the encounter from the start become a pretty high priority target. Brains are mechanical enemies which can pull the player towards themselves. Already it introduces a new power dynamic, forcing player to be cautious or risking being placed out of position. But that's not all. Brains also use frontal power shield, which activates, intercepting all projectiles coming from the front of the robot. You can either waste additional ammunition and time to break the shield or go for flanking maneuver. Grenade launcher is the best weapon to use against brains, as grenades landing behind target deal massive damage successfully bypassing the shield. Monster infighting helps in reinvigorating combat. This is a legacy mechanic taken straight from the Doom series and the first Quake. Enemies shooting at the player can damage other foes if they get into their line of fire. Damaged opponents become hostile to the ones who shot at them, leading into a brawl between enemies.
Fighting.
It's a cool mechanic, and one that can be forced and even used by the player to make their lives easier. The last levels take place in the heart of the Strogg capital city, in something akin to Palace Complex. The scenery changes to incorporate numerous decorative elements with gold signifying the grandiose of the facility. It's at the end of the journey when level designers either stopped caring or they ran out of ideas. The place is swarming with tanks. This is an enemy which appears around the midpoint of the campaign. Tanks are designed to be the toughest, deadliest hulks. I guess something reminiscent of Shamblers from the base game. Unfortunately, by themselves those enemies present a huge bullet sponges, but they aren't that threatening. They shoot rocket barrages, chain gun volleys or hyper blaster rounds. So in theory, there should be a high damage capability, right? Well, tanks are very slow and Quake 2 is a game about fast combat. So if player is going to just keep moving, strafing and flanking, then these cybernetic giants do not pose that much threat. There are specific scenarios where you can elevate tanks to be a deadly threat, but it needs specific interior design. They also work really well as support units for other Strogg monsters. I guess my main complaint is that they do not introduce any interesting ability to look out for. They are just those hulking stat sticks. High HP, high potential damage, but without anything making them really significant. So, what happens in the last levels of Quake 2? Developers place a lot of tanks in an environment with multiple tight corridors or in areas with not a lot of room for maneuvering. Yet again, player is forced to stop their frantic, adrenaline-pumping crusade and use simple peekaboo tactics. shooting from behind corner or bouncing grenades into the other room. Quake 2 offers few boss fights. Those encounters are pretty mediocre. Bosses are just those huge, imposing mechanical beasts with few attacks and a lot of HP. Unfortunately, they do not require any specific strategies to be defeated. Just run around and shoot until they die. If you have quad damage power up ready, then boss fight can take 15 seconds to be beaten. It all leads to an overwhelming feeling that the single player component of Quake 2 lacks something. It can even feel like a lesser version of its predecessor. The first Quake with its narrow roster of monsters had to use whatever it had in a perfect manner. Levels were created to be deadly puzzle boxes, packed with traps. Designers wanted to surprise and kill players. They took pride in it. Quake 2 is a bridge connecting the old way of designing FPSs with the modern approach. You know, fleshed out plot, locations having some meaning and sense. Unfortunately, by being more modern, it gets forgettable as it loses a lot of what made the first Quake feel special. The game is also easier. I finished every map pack of Quake 2 on Nightmare difficulty and it was much smoother than the first game. Weapons are the strongest point of Quake 2 single player experience. They are satisfying to use and offer a wide range of useful tools designed to get rid of the obstacles, which in this case are the Strogg forces. The enemy roster is fine. It's designed to provide challenges through use of specific enemies. At the same time, developers failed to seize the opportunity by creating numerous subpar encounters. I think that's the biggest flaw of Quake 2's combat. It can be thrilling and exhilarating, but too many times it also feels dull. Multiplayer was always the lifeblood of Quake franchise. For many players it was the defining feature of the series. Nerds from all around the world used to measure their virtual donks by the amount of frags they were able to accumulate in the round. Hectic, fast-paced combat, rewarding map knowledge, rapid movement and quick reactions. Multiplayer presents wild fun. Deathmatch mode is the legacy of Quake, its defining contribution to the multiplayer scene. For me, this series was always more about single player mode. The first time I got to experience the true Quake fragging rampage was in Quake 3 Arena. By today's standards, Quake 2 offers a very simple yet satisfying approach to multiplayer. PvP modes focus on fast-paced combat on pretty small arenas. Layout of each map plays a crucial role in dominating the battlefield, as players aware of weapon and ammo spawning spots can quickly seize an advantage. Continuous renewal of HP and armor becomes a significant part of survival. The fully stacked armor might be the difference between being one-shotted or surviving, so PvP is fast, chaotic, but there is a key to the madness. Skill and knowledge play a crucial role. Simplistic arena shooter design favors modes like Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag or Free for All. In one word, the classics. It's a nostalgic trip to the beginnings of online competitive play. Compared to the first Quake, I feel like Quake 2 has a stronger multiplayer component thanks to the new weapons. Chaingun, Hyper Blaster and Super Shotgun are the power weapons of each match. Usually hidden BFG becomes a surprise weapon if one of the players manages to acquire it. More narrow, small range of rocket launcher explosions makes it harder to use. While this weapon suffered a great downgrade from Quake 1 Days of Glory, it reforges the weakness into an advantage for players who can aim efficiently. Of course, Railgun is the absolute game changer when it comes to online play. This is a mobile no-scope sniper weapon, extremely powerful and satisfying to use. Fragging other players midair with this gun is ecstatic. No wonder there are lobbies reserved for railguns only.
Railed. Slow, mate.
Moment-to-moment gameplay of Quake 2's PvP is still exhilarating and fun. Regretfully, I think that the simplicity of the overall gameplay structure does not create a viable long-term experience. That's not the only problem. Low player numbers make it hard to find matches with substantial amount of players competing. It is possible to find a match with higher amount of players, but most of the lobbies are empty. You can find a decent match from time to time, but it's not reliable. Also, the game suffers from a bug showing inflated player numbers in lobbies while the real numbers are lower.
Latvia. LAW znak praw autorskich APS znak towarowy. The Developer Book.
It's clear that the remaster puts more emphasis on the single-player component. It ties strongly with the introduction of the cooperative mode. Players can join ranks in groups up to 4 or even 8 people. Each of the campaigns available for single-player can be also played in co-op. It will of course make them easier, but the main point in here is to have fun. And believe me, co-op is fun. For people playing on the same machine, split-screen co-op is also available. Quake 2 64 is a port of the game released for Nintendo 64 back in 1999. This version of the game also got the remastered treatment. The original port literally shined with new real-time lightning effects. Unfortunately, they kinda got lost amongst the remastered graphical updates. While playing this version of Quake 2, you can clearly notice the shortcomings which resulted from the hardware limitations of the Nintendo console. Developers remastered the game, sharpening the edges and increasing the resolution of the textures, also adding enemy models from the base game. Still, even with high resolution, it's noticeable that the graphics of Quake 2 64 look worse than the base game and other expansions. Textures are simplified. Limitations of the original port can be observed also in the level's structure.
Damn. This place looks bad. Look at the textures. Quake 2 64 doesn't hold up, unfortunately.
This version of the game offers 19 levels which are not interconnected to each other. Instead, Quake 2 64 goes for linear progression, one map after another. Most of the maps are also reduced in size, resulting in a situation where developers had to redo a lot of the original levels, taking into account smaller scope and simpler environments.
Okay. That's a similar room to the one in the first unit. Yeah. Okay. If you guys remember the basic Quake 2 level, then there's gonna be a trap here. Okay. Whoa!
From the standpoint of game dev historian or a person craving for piece of lore about development of Quake 2, it represents an interesting comparison between two versions of the same game. But for regular players, Quake 2 64 might feel lackluster. The presentation of the game's logo replaces an intro cinematic. Look at this, it's so retro. Just beautiful in its own way. Players start the game again crash landing on Strogg. This time we play as unnamed marine. Simpler level structure imposes itself right away. First levels quickly show resemblance to the original Quake 2 PC levels. But to be fair, some of the later levels expand the gameplay with original designs and ideas. Outside of the graphics, the music will be one of the features that will grab your attention right away. It differs greatly. The soundtrack composed for Quake 2 64 is focused on an ambient, non-invasive tracks. Some of them will invoke the gritty industrial themes, but the change is noticeable. In my opinion, the original heavy metal OST is just way better. It complements the moment-to-moment gameplay and the aesthetic of the heavily industrial, cybernetic world of Strogg in a much deeper way. Constraints become apparent within the gameplay itself. The protagonist lacks the ability to crouch.
Quake 64 does not have crouching. Okay.
Some of the enemy types were cut from the port. Barracuda sharks, brains, technicians and medics are conspicuously absent from the Quake 2 64 levels, essentially removing adversaries that demand a more strategic approach. Pickups cannot be stockpiled for later use. In a similar fashion as it happened in the first Quake, each pickup activates immediately after players' interaction. This way players cannot hoard stronger items, which in turn changes the dynamics of harder encounters. Exploration, map awareness and pickup placement becomes immensely important. As a nod to the first game, Quake 264 adds a new collectible item, invisibility. It allows players to either skip enemies or choose an advantageous position before starting the fight. So a question emerges. Is Quake 264 just an inferior version of the game? I wouldn't say so. While it definitely lacks in many departments, the game still offers some interesting encounters, and thanks to pickups being activated on interaction, it changes the way Quake 2 levels are played. Few of the later maps also operate in the low gravity settings, which was available only in the secret map of base Quake 2. The Nintendo 64 port also borrows ice caverns and a mechanic of sliding on ice from the Reckoning expansion. It's a shame that frozen surfaces are used very briefly in the game, because ice opens up options for some creative combat design. Remaster of Nintendo 64's port of Quake 2 presents an interesting take on classic Quake 2 formula. I think it aims to please retro enthusiasts and die-hard fans. For the regular players, it's a skippable addition. Still, I'm really happy that Quake 264 got the remastered treatment. The Reckoning is the first official expansion released for Quake 2. This time, players assume the role of Joker, a member of an elite marine squad. The main mission of this expansion is to infiltrate the Strogg moon base and destroy their fleet. The story again is very simplistic and brief, quickly fading into the background, giving way to combat. Introductory level changes the landscapes to a long rocky corridor stretching through mountain range. Joker explores dark caves and dives deep into mountain ponds. Deep within rocky ravines resides the new enemy type, Gex. Gex are very nimble, constantly trying to close the gap between them and the player with their long, impressive jumps. This is a versatile enemy, capable of spitting projectiles from distance. What's more, Gex are also nimble swimmers, making them a formidable opponent to face underwater. This is a good start. Soon enough, players arrive into more familiar locations, Strogg bases, factories and militaristic facilities. The Reckoning offers a pretty good weapon progression, with rewarding secrets and power-ups working the same as they did in the base Quake 2. Level design relies again on the units with interconnected levels. Developers decided to play a little bit with locations, making them visually more interesting. This expansion also adds short sections with slippery ice and entire levels with low gravity, spicing up the gameplay. However, the true spice of the Reckoning's gameplay comes in the form of new enemies, weapons and power-ups. Flashlight is the first addition to the roster. It's an item which can be used by the player at any time. Environments of the expansion can get really dark, welcoming player to light the way. But to be honest, it's a skippable and forgettable addition, as the game could be completed without ever using the flashlight. Dual fire damage is much more interesting. Behind the enigmatic name hides a power-up doubling the rate of fire of any weapon. Dual fire damage is essentially another offensive power-up which increases players' damage output. But don't forget that you will chew through ammunition much faster. The Reckoning adds 3 new weapons into the mix: the Trap, Iron Ripper and the Phalanx Particle Cannon. Trap is a very peculiar type of weapon. It should be treated more as a usable item, not a firearm. Player lays the trap on the floor. The moment an enemy makes contact with it, they suffer damage and are held in place. If trap deals enough damage to the target and kills it, then it leaves a medkit in its wake. So effectively there are 2 main uses for this item. Either use it to slow advancements of an enemy or use it to generate a health pack. Trap introduces a new element to Quake 2's gameplay, albeit an element which doesn't fit that well with the fast-paced guns-blazing combat. Trap is slow, but offers a reward. I have to admit that I used it rarely, mostly to regain some health. On one occasion it actually saved me from being overwhelmed by berserkers waiting behind a wall with an ambush. Iron Ripper shoots energy saw blades ricocheting off of walls and other structures. It deals strong damage and gives player an ability to kill targets hiding behind obstacles. The ricochet mechanic is harder to get right than grenade bounces though.
Can't do nothing to me, boy!
Iron Reaper unfortunately is powered by cells, eating 2 cells per shot, which isn't ideal as this is already a highly competitive ammunition bracket. BFG-10K, Hyper Blaster and Energy Shield are all commendable options. Phalanx Particle Cannon is the star of this expansion. It uses a completely separate type of ammunition capable of launching 2 powerful projectiles at the same time. Each of the projectiles deals also splash damage. It's especially effective against groups of enemies or larger foes.
Come on! So satisfying.
I found it extremely satisfying to use when I was able to connect my shots. You see, there is one gimmick with this weapon. Just like with the gap between front teeth, there is a small gap between projectiles. And just like with the teeth, you might have thought, it's incredibly small, insignificant. Turns out, it's noticeable. New mission is full of new threats. Open rocky areas, caves and swampy badlands are home to aforementioned gex. Inside Strogg compound, Joker will meet drones, small flying machines which work the same as medics. They can raise fallen Strogg. And oh boy, they did me dirty one time. You see, at one point in the expansion, player has to infiltrate the core reactor, which is a pretty small level, consisting mainly of 2 floors of long corridors encircling the core. Fighting through both floors was a daunting task. Tanks and gladiators proved to be quite a threat, but finally I was able to push through. So imagine my surprise when later few drones flew into circular corridor and brought back every downed enemy which haven't been dismembered. For me, it meant dealing with tanks and gladiators all over again. It was pure pain. The Reckoning introduces 3 new guard types. Reaper guards carrying Iron Reapers, Hyper Blaster guards capable of dealing a lot of damage spraying player with projectiles, then there are also guards using laser weapons. 3 new guard types are a welcomed addition as they do not enlarge a pool of bullet spongy enemies. Instead, they add new glass cannon type of enemies. Strong damage capabilities placed on a squishy bodies. I really like it.
Nice.
Talking about bullet sponges, we have those 2. The Reckoning introduces recolors of Super Tank, Gladiator and Iron Maiden. Super Tank and Gladiator use energy shields, which makes them even harder to kill. Beta Gladiator carries Phalanx Particle Cannon, while Super Tank gets a weaponry upgrade in form of homing rockets. New Iron Maiden variant also uses homing explosive projectiles. The expansion starts off quite strong with new interesting enemy type, adding 3 new weapons. Later foes prove to be more of a variations of existing monstrosities, expanding gameplay, but in the end it's mostly more of the same. Ground Zero, the second map pack released for Quake 2, offers a more meaningful spin on the original game formula, adding another set of new weapons and enemies but also changing the landscapes and few level design principles. Developers managed to feed in few callbacks to the first Quake game. New short cinematic opens a brand new simplistic narrative arc. This time we play as Stepchild, yet another marine tasked with taking fight to the Strogg army. Human fleet gets caught in a trap by the Strogg gravity well. Stepchild has to destroy the well in order to free the fleet before it will be decimated by the enemy forces. Again, the plot is just the background. New enemies and weapons are the highlight of the expansion. Right away, I'll admit that I perceive Ground Zero to be better than the Reckoning. This map pack consists of 5 units, again encompassing interconnected levels. Only this time, levels are more open. Designed as an amalgamation of corridors, halls and functional zones connected in a more realistic way than initial Quake 2 areas. On many occasions, at least 2 pathways lead to a location, offering 2 ways of advancing. Ground Zero involves more frequent backtracking. Players are going to travel back and forth through multiple levels, unlocking new mechanisms and acquiring keys. There are even multiple shortcuts being unlocked in case player has to go back to previously visited areas. Ground Zero is the expansion where Compass becomes an incredibly useful addition. I used it multiple times. Stepchild's weapon progression is much faster than in previous adventures. Developers allow players to wreak havoc earlier, giving more options in engaging enemies. Many new weapons are homages to firearms from the first Quake. ETF rifle is basically the nail gun.
This is a nail gun? That's a nail gun. Pretty satisfying nail gun.
A rapid-fire gun shooting decently fast projectiles. It resumes fire much faster than chain gun or hyper blaster, as it doesn't have to spin before shooting. Another upside of ETF rifle is its ammo type. Flechettes, which are commonly found in Ground Zero levels and are used only by this firearm. ETF rifle is a solid addition to the weapon roster, and a satisfying one at the same time. Plasma beam cannon is very reminiscent of Thunderbolt.
Oh shit. I like it.
This gun is considered to be an energy weapon, which means that it absolutely melts the shields of the enemies. And in my opinion, that's its main application. Plasma beam cannon unfortunately uses cells, which are better used on other devices. Progg's mine launcher should be familiar to the players who experienced the Scourge of Armageddon map pack from the first Quake. It's a reskinned grenade launcher spitting out proximity mines. Mines don't bounce off walls, instead they stick to the surface. Mine explosions deal less damage than grenades, but this weapon is still surprisingly useful. You can place a minefield while retreating, or even just blatantly launch the mines at opponents' faces. I mean, I used it like that many times as a way to preserve grenades. Tesla mines are Ground Zero's answer to the trap from the previous Quake 2 expansion. Traps zap nearby foes. Unfortunately, they can be destroyed and have very little HP, which means that the Strogg can get rid of them quite fast.
Place one Tesla mine here. Oh shit. Who cares? The other there. Okay. And right now
I use Tesla mines mostly while fighting against medics and medic commanders. Being able to buy even a little bit of time is crucial in those scenarios. Chain Fist is a flavor weapon. This is of course a nod towards Doom's chainsaw or axe from the first Quake. In Ground Zero it's basically useless at any difficulty higher than easy. In close combat, Super Shotgun will always be a better solution than Chain Fist. However, the example of Chain Fist helps to show how far developers have come when it comes to designing melee weapons in FPS games. Chainsaw in 2016's Doom represents a modern approach to melee. A limited use, super powered weapon rewarding players with glory well animated kills, being at the same time the resource generator. It's fascinating to observe the change and development of various elements of gameplay. From the times when developers hadn't yet got the grasp of what to do with certain elements, to modern times when said elements got refined. Modern melee weapons have a purpose.
come on!
Remastered Ground Zero unearthed the hidden disruptor and added it into the map pack. A gun which was buried deep within the game code can now be accessed during exploration. Disruptor shoots out small black holes, dealing massive damage to a single target. Ground Zero introduces rounds, which are the ammunition for this weapon. Disruptor's damage also completely disregards power shield and power screen, which is a massive advantage. Combine it with impressive rate of fire and you have a single target powerhouse. Ammunition for this gun is sparse, but it's definitely worth collecting. Ground Zero comes up with various new power-ups. Players' offensive capabilities gets boosted with dual damage, a smaller, tinier cousin of quad damage. Being weaker than quad damage doesn't mean that it's redundant though, it's still a powerful upgrade to players' damage output. Also, you can use both offensive power-ups back to back on longer encounters or during difficult boss fights. That thing alone makes double damage a mighty upgrade. I are Google's highlight pickups, interactive objects and enemies. I used it only once, it's a skippable item. Defensive Sphere is a floating ball shooting at enemies. It's a neat small item to use during encounters with multiple opponents, but I don't consider it to be very influential. Ground Zero added few more power-ups to its multiplayer maps, but I'm not sure if they are to be found in remastered maps. Seeing how neglected multiplayer mode is, I decided not to even bother with finding out. As Uncle Ben would say if he'd play Quake 2, with more weapons comes more enemies. Ground Zero developers learned their lessons from Quake 2. This expansion provides better mix of enemies in its encounters. Fights can be challenging and tough. On few occasions, player might get swarmed with enemies, but designers managed to avoid tedium during combat sections. I would even say that some of Ground Zero's encounters land close to being distinct and memorable. Ground Zero places more emphasis on strategically deploying gladiators throughout the levels. Berserkers and gunners are still common enemies, but players have to be cautious. A well-placed gladiator works as a fine and powerful marksman. Oh. Faster weapon progression accelerates the enemy progression. With this expansion, some old foes learn new tricks. Enforcers take less time to shoot, gunners use grenade barrages more frequently, also adding one more grenade to each volley. The threat posed by the known monsters gets increased. Enemies using explosive attacks keep shooting at players' last known location in order to counteract peekaboo tactics. Medics become the bane of this expansion, as right now they can revive fallen comrades much faster. Ground Zero is significantly harder than previous map packs and the base game. The Strogg forces got expanded in a more meaningful way than in the Reckoning. Stalkers are impressive. They are highly mobile, can travel on ceilings, deal high damage in melee range and can shoot quite precisely from afar. Stalkers are also deceptive. Those little guys can even play dead, therefore firing an extra shot at fallen stalker is a good precaution. I also love how they tend to avoid a lot of incoming projectiles by frantically jumping.
I like it. Jumping over bullets?
Stalkers are just awesome. Turrets are a new type of opponent in Quake, a fully stationary one. Ground Zero uses a lot of turrets. I thought that they would kill the pace of the game, but actually, I ended up being indifferent to this addition. On multiple occasions, turrets are used as a way to surprise players. They are easy to destroy, finally providing a non-evasive target for rocket launcher. Daedalus is just an upgraded recolored Icarus. The main difference is that they use personal shields right now. Disruptor or plasma beam rifle are the best way of taking them down. Medic commanders might be the most influential enemies added in this expansion. As I stated before, medics and their commanders are the main antagonists of Ground Zero. Developers heavily rely on them to provide challenge for players. And oh, they do provide! Medic commanders do not need bodies to revive, they summon Strogg units. This way you need to actively get out of your comfort zone and chase those guys, or they will endlessly create new targets for your bullets. They are also stronger than regular medics. Ground Zero provides two new boss encounters, both are quite solid. Carrier spawns other flying units besides being just a huge bullet sponge. The last boss is way more interesting and difficult. First of all, she uses a lot of deadly weapons, railgun, BFG and Disruptor. Then she spawns hordes of stalkers, which will overrun player if given enough breathing room. The most important change though, is the fact that this is a two-phase boss fight, with a long break between phases, so if player does not have both double damage and quad damage, then they cannot cheese the whole fight. I love it! Ground Zero is a pure evolution of Quake 2's mechanics and design patterns. It offers challenge and better designed weapons as well as terrific enemies. It's the strongest from the previously released remastered expansions. But there is one more new map pack, which in my opinion totally outshines everything we've seen this far. Call of the Machine.
This looks so good.
Shit!
Eat shit, guys! Ah, so that's how we are supposed to fight, huh? No passage. I have 11 HP. Cool. Cool. Survive. Come on. Goodbye. No. Doing it. Come on. Die. No. Where did you come from? No. Let's go!
Machine Games, creators of the fantastic Wolfenstein New Order and the map pack for the remake of the first Quake, shine again with this glorious, terrific addition into Quake 2 Legacy.
And I just realized Dimension of the Machine and Call of the Machine all took their name from Machine Games.
Call of the Machine is hands down the best campaign of the remaster. It's truly spectacular, expanding the boundaries of the game mechanics and level design, introducing modern updated approach to combat encounters. But most of all, it understands players and their primal cravings. Call of the Machine is satisfying. Now,
Come on, that was satisfying.
I'm not sure if Bethesda and id Software realized the true power and unfathomable potential of machine games. They understand FPSs like no other. And what was asked of them? To bastardize my beloved Wolfenstein reboot series with Youngblood? What a waste of talent. You already burned bridges with Mick Gordon, allegedly trying to destroy this genius's career. Please treat machine games with respect. Let them do whatever they want and await for miraculous results. The expansion starts similarly to Dimension of the Machine, in the hub area. We play as yet another Marine. The main goal is to reach the curators of the Strogg race and destroy them, but it's not that easy. In order to reach the goal, players have to send 6 other Marines into their own missions, creating 6 separate campaigns. And this, my friends, is a glorious return of episodic structure from old FPS games. Each campaign/operation represents a completely new environment and weapon progression. Machine Games flex their creative muscle, taking Quake 2 into entirely new dimension in terms of aesthetics and level design.
Damn. Look at this. I mean, it's still Quake 2.
It only proves the point that it doesn't matter, the limitations of your engine, creativity and how you use said engine. I mean, look at the waterfalls in here. Of course, by today's standards, they don't look that good by the Quake 2 standards. Like, holy shit, this is creative as fuck. Machine Games takes advantage of the episodic structure of operations. Each Marine lands in a completely different, distinct environment. This map pack takes every resource available, redistributing weapons, power-ups and enemy types from previous expansions between operations. Not only that, developers don't feel constrained by the roster of weapons and enemies. They pick various firearms and monsters as they wish and place them in one episode, but for the other ones, they might pick a different set of guns and foes, which further differentiates operations. One of the Marines might encounter beta variant of the Gladiators and numerous Icaruses on their mission, while other Marine might fight against regular Gladiators and the joint forces of Daedaluses and Stalkers. But that's not all. Developers further differentiate the episodes by adding operation-wide affixes. For example, on Operation Laser Eyes, Berserkers and Icarus have less HP, which makes fighting them more manageable as they might appear in greater numbers. Beta Gladiators lose their power screen, but it appears back in other operations. It shows the attention to detail and clear design goals within each mission. Holy shit, that's impressive! But wait, there's more. Each operation has a theme. Operation Firewall is all about infiltrating this huge Strogg stronghold, with its most impressive part taking place on the huge courtyard. Look at how expansive this place is. This is already a change from basic Quake 2 and its tight rooms and corridors. I mean, dare I say it's reminiscent of 2? Operation Darkest Depths completely changes the environments, taking place in cold caverns, with ancient structures partially built into them. Or maybe take a look at my favorite mission, Operation Corpse Run. Just look how it starts.
Okay. Okay. I only have Blaster and BFG. That's gonna be a trap.
The theme here is horror movies. The first unlockable weapon is the friggin' BFG, and they later tease players with various horror movie references. Fighting on a bloodied surfaces, dropping player into dark maze of corridors and slowly releasing mutants to hunt them. Come on, this is creativity. And then they send players to the moon. Yeah, really. In a scenario very reminiscent of some space horror movies like Alien. I mean, simply by playing the level I got flashbacks of the Marine campaign from the first AVP game. That shit was terrifying. The vast layers of creativity and artistry are out of this world. Quake 2 modernized the design of its predecessor. Call of the Machine modernizes the design of Quake 2 to match current standards, showing its true potential. Each operation has its own boss fights with health pools. Developers use existing bosses and add few tweaks to make the fights more engaging. Also, the environments by itself add to the combat experiences. Garbage Collector summoning stalkers has a BFG 10K waiting to be grabbed by the player. BFG 10K being a great weapon to instantly get rid of swarms of little enemies in order to make taking down the boss easier.
What? Let's go double damage on your ass! You're done, my man.
There's a huge mutant chasing player with a room full of debris designed to give false sense of security. The boss can actually destroy debris, which is an moment for the player. Boss fights are definitely more challenging than encounters from the base game, especially since most of the bosses either summon new helpers or open a gate or other way for new foes to emerge. Machine games are a group of exceptionally experienced developers when it comes to creating satisfying combat encounters. Already you could notice that they upgraded combat arenas to be more in line with current wider areas designed specifically to give player enough breathing room. Previous comparisons to Doom were not accidental.
Three. Oh!
That wall, I mean... Shit! No!
That's Doom! That wall opening up, that's Doom! That's Doom design, holy shit!
They give you options, but it's also very noticeable when from time to time they take away those options, placing player in a confined small areas. And you know that is done on purpose. There is no coincidence in Call of the Machine. Every encounter is meticulously planned. Developers shine in their understanding of enemy compositions. If they want to drown player with enemies, which they often do, they go for weaker foes with few stronger ones. This way it's still relatively easy to recognize targets that matter. If they go for stronger, advanced foes, they give player breathing room. An ability to approach the group of monsters on player's own terms. This is what we lacked in base Quake 2. Thanks to the masterful approach to combat, encounters in Call of the Machine stay fresh and exciting. Some fights are created to be challenging, some are intended to be purely satisfying.
What? We're doing it. We are doing it! Quad damage! Quad damage! Change weapon! You have nothing on me, dude. Nothing!
Call of the Machine has numerous incredibly fun and memorable encounters. The map pack even introduces two new enemies into the mix. One is the Gunner Commander, a bigger gunner variant, rocking power screen and switching chain gun to the ETF rifle. Pretty strong enemy. Then, on one of the levels, developers sneak in Spider Strogg from the PlayStation port of Quake 2. I mean, this is kinda fun and brave. They reintroduced this enemy only to be a cameo on one singular level. Maps within each episode are interconnected in a similar fashion as they were inside Quake 2's units. This time, there are multiple ways in and out. Maps are pretty small, with many of them also having few platforming sections. Platforming is easy and brief, serving more as a fun break from combat. Traps and secrets make their return. Secrets especially become impressive. The placement and rewards are meaningful on harder difficulties.
That's a good secret hole.
Call of the Machine also offers access to few secret maps. And oh boy, they are awesome! Secret maps are treated like a short trials, a condensed, usually very challenging gauntlet where players have to face staggering amount of strokes. I love it. It's pure carnage and satisfaction.
Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Secret maps allow players to unlock rare weapons. After completing the trial, the reward usually encompasses a rare power-up, backpack and ammo, which in itself already represents a decent reward. Wow, Call of the Machine is impressive. I cannot overstate how much I love this map pack. It's just pure fan service, especially the ending. It plays off of player nostalgia while also offering a nice surprise. This is a high quality expansion. Go play it. We arrived to the part dedicated to Steam reviews. I want to analyze between 100 to 200 Steam opinions for the title. You all know my sentiments regarding Quake 2 Remastered, but I'm interested in the general opinion of the player base. At the time of making this review, Quake 2 sits at a score of 94% positive reviews out of almost 6,500 user reviews. Recent opinion score oscillates around 97% positive reviews. Quake 2 is definitely a strongly appreciated game. The vast majority of write-ups mention the nostalgia associated with this title. People approach the topic reminiscing in their memories and praising the faithfulness of the remaster. There are even few newcomers who also appreciated the opportunity to experience the game for the first time on modern hardware. Music made by Sonic Mayhem is perceived as a great advantage of Quake 2, even in the negative reviews. The inclusion of the map packs and the Nintendo 64 port was met with a warm reception. There is even this person who rated each of the map packs, presenting some higher level math. I do not agree with these scores, but I don't have to. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Looking at the Steam reviews shows that there are people who love the N64 port and found it to be the greatest addition to the game. In my eyes, it felt like a cool offering, serving more as a curious side content rather than meaningful expansion of the product. But what about Call of the Machine? Did the general player base enjoy it? Surprisingly few reviews even mention the newest map pack. The ones that do praise it immensely though. I suppose many gamers went for the base experience, maybe just glancing at other content. It's a shame, as I perceive Call of the Machine to be the absolute best Quake 2 has to offer. And one side note. Few reviewers who were comparing various expansions found Ground Zero to be the worst one. Arguments usually refer to it being a boring slog, which is surprising to me. I actually liked it the best if we were to exclude Call of the Machine. But I guess the expanded, more open structure of level design can be confusing, especially with its reliance on backtracking. With so many positive reviews, the negative opinions are the ones that are more interesting to me. Changing the mood and atmosphere from the first Quake is the primary point of contention, even in the positive reviews. Numerous gamers did not enjoy the new art direction. The speed of our character was also met with criticism. There is this strong belief, especially in the multiplayer portion of the community, that true Quake is inextricably linked with lightning-fast movement speed. Quake 2 is definitely slower than the first game. In the single-player section, it does not pose that much problem, but for multiplayer aficionados, it might be a pill too hard to swallow. In general, if your main goal with Quake 2 is to play satisfying multiplayer matches, then this remaster won't meet your needs. It's clear that it wasn't the focus, and the online player base is definitely on the lower spectrum. Seek Discord servers dedicated to the game. Maybe there you would find some riveting, skill-dependent private lobbies. Sizable amount of negative reviews describe Quake 2 as dull and repetitive. I guess it might be a testament to the encounter design of the base game, failing to provide enough nuance to keep the combat fresh. I already described my take on the encounters, so it's nice to see that some people share my observations. Night Dive Remastered received a strongly positive reception. I love what they did with the game. I adore their approach to modernizing few gameplay elements, even adding some tricks to the old enemies. However, there are some die-hard Quake 2 fans who found the changes to be too much. Still, this is a well-made product, and in my honest opinion, an example of how to remaster games. Quake 2 offers only 13 achievements to unlock. The game uses a very lazy, simplistic approach to the trophy hunt. Achievements take a role of milestones awarded for story progression. 9 trophies are gradually awarded for completing each unit of the base Quake 2 single-player experience. The remaining 4 are unlocked after finishing each one of the expansions. And that's all. No difficulty requirements, no multiplayer or exploration-based challenges. It's kind of a shame. We could use at least 2 additional challenges that would require some extra work. A good example would be the one from the original Quake, where player has to kill a shambler with an axe. That was fun. Remastered Quake 2 is an interesting dive into the past. This was the game of my childhood, so naturally few nostalgia strings were pulled. Astonishingly enough, the gunplay is still solid, weapons are satisfying and powerful, giving player this sense of overpowering might. Fast-paced combat is the heart of Quake 2. Mixed with Sonic Mayhem's terrific heavy metal soundtrack, it creates exciting, riveting encounters. Unfortunately, combat is also uneven, showing its age through various subpar tight locations, taking away the snappy, rapid shootouts and exchanging them for slow, positional gunfights. Multiplayer is not the focus of the remaster. You can find some lobbies and have decent games, but it's not a reliable experience. Adding cooperative play, however, is worth the highest price. Funny enough, I think that modernizing the old-school FPS approach made Quake 2 forgettable. The game lost the episodic structure, characteristic levels which were self-contained puzzle boxes with sets of traps, secrets and challenges. Thanks to this choice, Quake 2 aged worse than its predecessor. Still, it's a part of gaming history and a solid title by itself. The remaster treats the source product with utmost respect, adding even a small Quake 2 encyclopedia. Developers show their respect for the player base by remastering all of the official expansions for the game, each expansion adding new weapons and enemies into the mix. Then there is even a remastered version of Quake 2 port for N64, which is an interesting addition. Call of the Machine, the original map pack released for the remaster, is worth the asking price alone. It represents the modernized take on Quake 2, reintroducing the episodic structure with various beautiful new locations, extremely satisfying combat experiences, challenging boss encounters, and marvelous attention to detail.
Bam! Bam, come to me, boy! Oh, that's a trap. I mean, this thing's so doomed. Come on. Oh, yes, one down. Damn!
I recommend this game. Hey, thank you for watching this video till the end. If you liked it, then hit the thumbs up, leave a comment and subscribe for more longer reviews in the future. If you didn't like it, then let me know what you didn't like. I'm open for criticism. My question to you after this video is, with the rumors of it working on a new Quake game, what are your wishes for the title? Would you like for the franchise to return to its dark fantasy eldritch roots, stay within the confines of the Strogg related plot, or just go for multiplayer experience akin to the Quake 3 Arena or Quake Champions. So that's all from me. Bye.